For 10 years, I believed my husband was working abroad to build our future. He called every week, sent money, brought gifts on holidays. I raised our daughter alone and waited, never questioning why his visits became fewer or why his explanations became vaguer. Until one day I boarded a flight to Singapore without telling him. I wanted to surprise him. Instead, I uncovered a life I was never meant to see. A house, a woman, 3 children, and a man who opened the front gate and kissed his son on the forehead. A man who used to call me his wife. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. I walked away and I made a decision. If he could build a second life behind my back, I would expose it in front of everyone he tried to protect. And I knew exactly where to start. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if this story hits too close to home. You're in the betrayal room, where lies fall and truth always comes due. Arlena Quinn stepped out of the terminal at Changi Airport, the humid air instantly curling her neatly pressed hair. She hadn't flown internationally in years, and certainly not alone. The suitcase behind her rolled like a soft echo of her own resolve, measured, deliberate, unstoppable. Her husband, Clayton Merrick, was supposed to be staying at the Conrad Singapore. That was the hotel she found mentioned in his last forwarded itinerary. But when she arrived, the front desk smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry, we have no guest by that name." She showed them the booking code. It didn't exist. Unfazed, she left the hotel and headed to the headquarters of Logan Rise Logistics, the company Clayton had said he consulted for in Asia. The office was sleek and modern. The receptionist typed his name. Frowned. "There's no one listed under that name in our directory," she said. "Are you sure he works here, or he?" Arlena nodded slowly. "I'm sure." The truth was she hadn't been sure in a long time. But now her doubts had form. They had weight. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was an automatic alert from her shared credit card account. Grocery purchase, local chain, in a residential neighborhood. Same one from last week. And the week before. She took a cab to Sengkang, a quiet suburb northeast of downtown. The address led her to a 2-story house with white shutters, flower beds, and 2 scooters parked out front. A boy's voice rang out behind the gate, "Daddy's home." The door opened. A man in khakis and a polo shirt came jogging up the path, lifted the boy into his arms, and laughed. A woman stepped outside. She was barefoot, holding a toddler. Arlena knew that laugh. She had heard it over the phone 1,000 times. She didn't approach. She didn't speak. She turned around and walked back down the street, trembling from something deeper than rage. Deception that precise wasn't careless. It was engineered. Back at her hotel, Arlena opened her laptop and logged into her joint bank portal. Over the next 4 hours, she tracked transfers, transactions, property purchases, and school tuition records. Everything was right there, quietly laid out in documents and dollar signs. The next flight to New York wasn't for another 10 hours. But Arlena didn't sleep. She spent the night building a list of names, a list of accounts, a list of consequences. Clayton thought distance made it easier to lie. Arlena was about to show him what silence can do. By the time Arlena Quinn landed back in New York, she had already created 2 burner email accounts, set up a virtual folder titled Southeast Assets, and printed over 60 pages of transaction logs, all tied back to Clayton Merrick. She didn't tell her daughter Harper she had been gone. Harper was used to Arlena being busy, and Arlena needed her to stay innocent just a little longer. For now, the first person Arlena called was Deanna Royce, her oldest friend, and a corporate attorney with a very specific set of contacts. Deanna answered on the first ring. "Are we talking civil or criminal?" she asked flatly, skipping hello. Arlena exhaled. "Both. But I want it clean. No mess. No headlines until I want headlines." They met 2 hours later in a quiet wine bar in Midtown. Arlena slid over a manila envelope. Inside were printouts of wire transfers, mortgage records for the house in Sengkang, and school enrollment documents listing Clayton as emergency contact and legal guardian for 3 children, none of whom Harper had ever heard of. Deanna scanned the documents and raised her eyebrows. He's not hiding an affair. He's running a second life. And this is enough to bury him. I don't want to bury him, Arlena said calmly. I want him exposed. I want both families in the same room. I want him to answer questions without a script. Deanna leaned back, considering. That'll take time. I have until March. Deanna blinked. What's in March? Harper's 18th birthday. Deanna smiled slowly. Perfect. For the next 8 weeks, Arlena operated like a strategist preparing for war. She contacted a private investigator, not to follow Clayton, but to follow Celine Cross, the other woman. She found out Celine was listed on a business license as the co-owner of a children's boutique funded by a shell company registered in Delaware. Guess whose name was on the parent entity? Arlena froze those accounts. She contacted the private elementary school where the youngest child, Nova, was enrolled. As Clayton's legal wife, she had the right to question whether he had used her social security number or joint income on any applications. He had. She filed a fraud report. The next move was more subtle. Arlena began building a social media presence under a new name, a curated account with posts about parenting, resilience, and loyalty. She followed Selene, liked a few photos, commented once your little ones are precious, just enough to trigger curiosity but not suspicion. Then she waited. The trap would only work if both ends pulled at the same time. Selene needed to feel like something was off. Clayton needed to feel untouchable. And Harper needed to still believe in her father. During this time, Arlena was cordial with Clayton. He called once every 10 days like clockwork, and she never let her voice shake. She asked how business was, told him Harper made the honor roll, even hinted that they should plan something special for her 18th. I was thinking a big dinner, she said once. Something formal, all the important people there. Clayton chuckled. Sounds expensive. I'll take care of it, she replied. In the background of the call, she heard a child laugh. A boy's voice. Clayton muted the line for a second. When he returned, his tone had shifted. Sorry, colleague's kid at the office, he lied. Arlena smiled at the phone. Of course. The venue she booked was a gallery space in Brooklyn. White walls, clean acoustics, enough room for 70 guests. She worked with a caterer to design a high-end tasting menu, hired a photographer, sent formal invitations. Clayton received his by mail and by email. Celine received hers through a friend who claimed to be a branding consultant interested in boutique partnerships. The invitation was generic, celebrating a young woman's milestone. No last names, no warning. And Harper was just excited to have her father there for once. She still didn't know. Arlena debated whether to tell her beforehand. But deep down, she knew the impact would land harder if it was seen, if the truth unraveled in front of everyone. 3 days before the event, Celine posted an Instagram story in a dress boutique with the caption, "Finally found the perfect one." 2 hours later, Clayton texted Arlena. "Can't wait for the dinner. Just tell me what time to show." He had no idea. Deanna called the night before the event. "You sure about this?" "Yes. You're not doing this to hurt your daughter. I'm doing this to protect her. From becoming me." Silence. Then Deanna said, "I'll be there, just in case." Arlena hung up and looked at the final guest list. Everything was in place. Every piece, every name, every reveal. Clayton Merrick was about to walk into a room where his 2 lives would collide, and he would have no idea which door would close on him first. The gallery was quiet before the storm. Soft lighting illuminated the white walls, casting a warm glow across polished concrete floors. A string quartet rehearsed in the far corner. Waiters in black moved like shadows, arranging glasses and adjusting plates on minimalist wooden tables. Arlena stood at the center of it, all dressed in a slate blue gown that said nothing and promised everything. Harper was getting ready upstairs with a stylist Arlena had hired for the evening. She didn't know the full guest list. Arlena had made sure of that. It was better this way. At 6:12 p.m., the first guests arrived. Deanna Royce came alone, carrying a small box and a look of quiet calculation. She kissed Arlena on the cheek and whispered, "Are you ready?" "I've been ready since the day I saw his face on that porch." At 6:30 p.m., Clayton Merrick entered through the main doors. He looked effortlessly charming in a navy blue suit, his smile lighting up as he approached Arlena with outstretched arms. "You look incredible," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Arlena accepted it without flinching. "I'm glad you made it," she said evenly. "Harper will be thrilled." "Where is she?" "Upstairs. She'll come down soon. Go mingle. There are people here you should meet." He smiled again and turned toward the main hall. Arlena watched as he disappeared into the crowd, accepting drinks and greeting strangers like the polished executive he had always pretended to be. At 6:42 p.m., Celine Cross arrived with her 3 children. She wore a black cocktail dress, simple but expensive. Her oldest son, Micah, held her hand. The younger 2 clung to her legs, wide-eyed and restless. A woman Arlena had hired met them at the door. "Welcome," she said, offering a glass of sparkling juice to the kids. "Your table is this way." Celine looked around, confused. "Is this for the brand event?" "It is," the woman said with a smile. "We're celebrating a major milestone for a client's daughter, lots of connections in retail. Great networking opportunity." Celine hesitated, then nodded. She took her children's hands and followed the woman toward the gallery's side wing, where a few families were already seated. She didn't see Clayton yet. That too was intentional. At 7:40 p.m., Harper descended the stairs. 18, radiant, unaware. She wore a pale ivory dress, simple and elegant. Her eyes sparkled when she saw her father. She ran to him, arms open, and he scooped her into a hug. "You came," she whispered. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Arlena stood nearby, silent. The moment was real for Harper. That mattered more than anything else. By 7:15 p.m., the room was full. Guests sat, drinks poured, and appetizers circulated. The quartet began to play a soft rendition of Clair de Lune. At 7:20, the lights dimmed, and Arlena stepped onto the small platform near the front. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate my daughter, Harper. Today marks her 18th birthday, but more than that, it marks a turning point between childhood and everything that comes after." A light applause followed. Clayton stood in the crowd, smiling with pride. Arlena continued. "Harper is intelligent, creative, fiercely loyal. Traits she gets from her father, no doubt." Clayton's smile widened. "And so I'd like to invite her father to say a few words." Clayton stepped up confidently, taking the mic. "Thank you, Arlena," he said warmly. "And thank you all for coming. Harper, sweetheart, I've missed so many of your milestones, and tonight I'm—" He stopped. Across the room, just beyond the circle of light, stood Selene. And behind her, Micah, Ellis, and Nova. Celine's eyes locked on Clayton's. Confusion first, then recognition, then horror. Micah tilted his head. "Daddy." Gasps rose like a wave across the gallery. Clayton's face drained of color. Arlena stepped forward again and gently took the microphone from his hand. "I'd like to thank Selena for coming," she said calmly, "and for bringing her children. It means a lot to Harper that everyone who shares her father's love is here tonight." Clayton took a step back. "Arlena, what is this?" "This," she said, her voice low but steady, "is your life. All of it. Together. At last." The lights brightened slightly. A large screen at the back of the room flickered to life. A slideshow began photos of Harper as a child, her first steps, kindergarten graduation. Then seamlessly photos of Clayton, in Singapore, with Celine, holding Nova in a hospital, at a soccer game with Micah, kissing Celine's cheek in front of a bakery. "Stop this," he muttered. But no one moved. Celine looked stricken. "You told me you were divorced." You told me she was crazy, that she made things up." The room was silent. Harper stood at the edge of the crowd, her face frozen. Harper Clayton began stepping toward her. She raised a hand to stop him. "Don't." Arlena turned toward her daughter. You still have time to say something, sweetheart. You deserve the last word. Harper looked around the room at the families, the truth now exposed, the pieces of her father's deception scattered in plain sight. Then she walked forward, took the mic, and simply said, "Happy birthday to me, I guess." The room erupted not in applause, but in murmurs, questions, the rustle of guests collecting their coats. Clayton stood in the center, trapped between two lives, and for the first time in over a decade, no script could save him. Clayton Merrick didn't leave through the front door that night. He disappeared through a side exit, slipping past the stunned caterers and photographers, as if retreating from a crime scene. Arlena watched him go from the second-floor balcony, arms folded tightly against her chest, eyes cold. He didn't call, he didn't write. But his silence didn't stop the fallout. By morning, Celine Cross had emptied her boutique of inventory and closed the store indefinitely. She removed her children from school 2 days later, citing a family emergency and refusing to return calls from Clayton. Arlena knew because the private investigator she'd hired was still watching. Harper barely spoke the day after the party. She stayed in her room, phone off, blinds drawn. Arlena left food by her door, said nothing. She knew grief needed silence before it could form words. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived from Logan Rise Logistics, a statement that Clayton Merrick was no longer affiliated with the company. His consulting agreement had been terminated immediately due to a serious breach of ethical standards and contract integrity. Deanna had predicted it. He probably used internal accounts to fund personal expenses tied to the second family, she told Arlena over the phone. They won't press charges, companies like this just want distance. But that gives us room. Arlena had already moved on that front. With Deanna's help, she'd submitted a formal fraud complaint to the IRS, pointing out Clayton's duplicate household deductions, false dependency claims, and shell transfers through foreign entities. Quietly, without flair. Let the government handle the cleanup. By the end of the week, a federal inquiry was underway. Subpoenas followed. Bank accounts froze. Property assessments were requested. A formal audit was triggered on both domestic and offshore holdings tied to Clayton Merrick's name. Through all of it, Arlena never changed her tone. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak to reporters when whispers started circling online. A single video clip had leaked from the party. Harper's final line, "Happy birthday," to me, I guess, layered over images of Celine and her children in shock. It went viral within days. Arlena refused every interview request. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record-keeping. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after the party, Harper came downstairs in sweatpants, hair, messy eyes, swollen. She poured a bowl of cereal, sat at the kitchen counter, and said, "I can't decide if I feel betrayed or stupid." Arlena sipped her coffee. "You don't have to choose." Harper nodded slowly. "You knew for a while, didn't you?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" Arlena set her cup down gently. "Because knowing too early wouldn't have protected you. It would have just made you angry. I needed you to see it yourself when you were ready." Harper was silent for a long time, spoon tapping her bowl. Then she said, "I'm not ready to forgive him." "You don't have to. What about Celine?" Arlena considered. She believed what he told her. "I don't blame her. But I don't pity her either. She's still living in the house. Not for long." That was true. With his accounts frozen and assets seized, Clayton could no longer afford the mortgage on the Sengkang property. Celine would have no choice but to vacate, and custody arrangements for the children would get messy, assuming Clayton even had a legal claim left to stand on. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Clayton himself. Typed, signed, formal. It began with, "I never intended for it to spiral this far." Arlena read the first paragraph, then folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She didn't respond. There was nothing to salvage. No version of his apology that could undo a decade of calculation. Harper, however, did respond. She sent her father a single text, "I hope you become the man you pretended to be." Clayton never replied. Celine eventually reached out not to Arlena, but to Deanna through a legal mediator. She requested a signed statement from Arlena, confirming that Celine had no knowledge of Clayton's fraud. Arlena agreed, quietly, off the record. Not for Celine, but for the children. No child deserved to live under the shadow of someone else's lie. By month's end, the last of the legal motions were filed. Deanna handed Arlena a folder labeled Resolution. It contained the full breakdown accounts, trust reallocations, termination documents, and a letter from the federal court confirming a formal investigation into Clayton Merrick was now active. Arlena opened the folder once, then closed it. That night she sat on the back porch of her home blanket over her leg's glass of wine in hand. Harper was upstairs reading. The house was quiet. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. What she felt was something simpler, heavier. 10 years of lies, 3 weeks of exposure, 1 lifetime of repair ahead. She raised her glass to no one in particular and whispered, "Silence is never weak. It's where the sharpest truths grow." It started with a headline. U.S. business consultant investigated for dual household fraud in Singapore and New York. No names, no photos, just a story buried deep in the financial section of a local paper about offshore assets, frozen accounts, and irregular tax filings tied to an anonymous whistleblower. But those who knew, knew. Arlena read it once, folded the paper, and placed it in her desk drawer. She didn't need to keep it. The truth had already done what it was supposed to do. Clayton's attorney attempted to make contact twice in 1 week, first by email, then through a certified letter. Deanna intercepted both and returned them unopened. Let him file if he wants something, she told Arlena. But he won't. Not now. Not while he's being audited in 2 countries. The house in Sengkang was listed for sale within days. The photos had barely been posted online when an anonymous user tagged the listing on social media with the caption, "The house Betrayal built." It gained traction. Celine deleted her accounts shortly after. Arlena stayed quiet. She didn't react when former mutual friends messaged her privately pretending to check in while really fishing for details. She didn't respond to Harper's private school director when they offered counseling for the family. She didn't even blink when Harper's old babysitter texted, "Wait, is all that online about your husband?" True. The only person Arlena truly spoke to during those weeks was Harper. They began going on evening walks, just the 2 of them, no phones, no questions. Harper still wasn't talking about her father, but she was talking about college again, about New York, about maybe double majoring, about the possibility of writing. One evening, she stopped mid-step and turned to Arlena. "Would you have stayed if you never went to Singapore?" Arlena didn't answer right away. "I don't think I would have left," she said at last. "Not really. I would have just waited. And I think that's worse." Harper nodded. "Then I'm glad you went." They didn't say anything after that. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full. A week later, Harper received a package in the mail. It was from Clayton. A silver charm bracelet, the kind he used to send her on birthdays when he couldn't be there. But this one came with a note. "I know I let you down. I hope one day when you're ready we can start over." Harper placed the note in a drawer and left the bracelet in the box. She didn't say anything to Arlena, but Arlena saw it. She noticed the way Harper's mouth tightened when she walked past the mail basket, the way her fingers curled when she heard her phone buzz. There was a part of Harper that still wanted answers, but she no longer needed them to move forward. Arlena remembered what Deanna had told her once. The goal isn't to get closure. The goal is to stop needing it. 2 weeks later, Clayton was formally charged with multiple counts of tax evasion, financial misrepresentation, and fraudulent use of marital identity. The court date was set for 6 months out. He remained in Singapore under restricted travel while his legal team negotiated bail conditions. He was not permitted to contact Arlena or Harper again, but he tried. Through proxies, anonymous accounts, even through Celine, who reached out once more, this time not for clarification, but for warning. "He's not the man I thought he was either," Celine said over the phone. "I think you should know he's trying to move assets again, offshore through crypto this time. If the authorities don't know, they will soon." Arlena listened, thanked her, hung up. She immediately forwarded the conversation to Deanna. By then, Arlena had already moved Harper's college fund to a protected trust, transferred the deed of her home to an irrevocable living trust, and updated every legal tie she had ever shared with Clayton Merrick. It was like removing a tumor, not sudden, not violent, but exact and total. The day Harper received her acceptance letter to NYU, she ran into the kitchen crying. Not from sadness, but release. "I got in," she whispered. Arlena hugged her so tightly she forgot how to breathe. "You got in," she echoed again and again. That night, as Harper packed a bag to visit campus, Arlena sat alone on the back porch. She thought about everything Clayton had built, 2 families, 2 careers, 2 narratives, and how quickly it all fell apart, not because of an explosion, but because one woman stopped waiting and started asking questions. Some betrayals collapse in noise, others dissolve in silence. And sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't punishment, it's freedom. I used to think closure came with confrontation. That there had to be a moment, one defining second, where the liar was exposed, the damage was repaid, and justice stood tall in front of everyone who ever doubted you. But now I know better. Closure comes in quieter ways. In locking your doors without looking back. In no longer checking to see if his name lights up your phone. In watching your daughter laugh again genuinely freely, without the weight of a man who called himself father while building a second family across the ocean. It's been 4 months since that night. The night 2 worlds collided in a gallery of glass and light. The night his past caught up to his present. The night Harper saw her hero fall and stood tall anyway. People ask me if I'd do it again, if I'd book that flight, if I'd walk up to that house in Singapore and let myself see what he worked so hard to hide. The answer is yes. Every time, yes. Because I would rather know the truth and ache from it than live another decade smiling through a lie. I don't hate him, not anymore. Hate is heavy and I've carried enough. He's no longer allowed to contact us. Not legally, not personally. But sometimes I still see shadows of him. In a phrase Harper uses. In the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. Little reminders that even betrayal leaves fingerprints. But I've reclaimed myself. Piece by piece, document by document. He used to say I was too emotional to handle the financial side of our life. Now the IRS is combing through his offshore ledgers because of mine. He thought I wouldn't notice the names on those property titles. He thought I'd just keep waiting, keep nodding, keep believing. He forgot I was paying attention. He forgot I stopped loving him long before I stopped protecting him. I don't think he ever expected me to fight back because I never raised my voice. But that was his mistake. He assumed silence meant surrender. What he didn't understand is, silence is just another kind of strategy. And mine was simple. Let him build, let him lie, let him feel safe. And then take it all apart, one truth at a time. Harper is leaving for college next month. She wants to double major journalism and law. Go figure. She doesn't talk about her father much. But I see it in her, the strength, the fire, the knowing. She'll never let someone rewrite her story behind her back. Not now. Not after this. And me, I'm still here. Still standing. But not waiting anymore. Not hoping for calls. Not second-guessing my instincts. I don't need a new beginning. I just need peace. And I've finally made space for it. If you're listening to this wondering if the person you love is hiding something, I won't tell you what to do. But I will tell you this. You deserve to know. You deserve the truth, even if it breaks you. Because from those pieces you'll build something real, something only yours. This was my story. Not about a man who betrayed me, but about a woman who remembered her worth. Thanks for listening. And if you ever need a reminder, the truth doesn't need permission to be told. Welcome to the Betrayal Room, where silence ends and power begins.